Hi, I'm political analyst and Citizen Voice President Gary Dietrich, here to make sense with you now out of Prop 34, coming up on your California November 2012 ballot. This one dealing with eliminating the death penalty. Certainly an issue in California that's raged for some time. You're going to have a chance to vote on it here this November. To help us make sense out of this, for the yes side, we have Natasha Minsker. She's the campaign manager for Safe California. And representing the no side, it's McGregor Scott, who's the chair of Californians for Justice and Public Safety. Thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Gary.
All right. Let's start with yes on 34. Why would Californians want to vote, Natasha, to eliminate the death penalty?
Prop 34 will replace the death penalty with life without possibility of parole as the maximum punishment for murder. It will make convicted killers work in prison and pay restitution into the Victims' Compensation Fund. It will save the state hundreds of millions of dollars. And it will direct a total of $100 million over a 4-year period to local law enforcement to solve more rape and murder cases. Prop 34 ensures that we will never execute an innocent person in California. It is tough justice. It keeps convicted killers in prison until they die, and it makes them work and pay restitution. It will save hundreds of millions. The official analysis says Prop 34 will save $130 million every year. That's money that we need for our schools and for law enforcement.
Okay, thank you. And Gregor, why no?
Well, there are a multitude of reasons. First and foremost, California's death penalty law is the law of the state. It has been upheld as constitutional by the United States Supreme Court on multiple occasions. And it, as exercised and practiced in this state, it is absolutely reserved for the worst of the worst. Approximately 2% of all murders in this state wind up on death row. This is a selective process where those who have kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered children, those who have killed police officers in the line of duty, those who have brutally tortured their victims before killing them, these are the kind of people that we're talking about. And it sounds attractive to say, oh, we're going to save money, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is, if we do away with the death penalty in California, we are going to spend a whole lot more money housing and providing medical care for those who would otherwise be executed in a timely fashion. So we're going to provide housing and medical care for people going into their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And those real costs are going to dwarf anything that is derived in a savings from elimination of the death penalty.
Okay, thanks for that. I want to dig into some of these specific issues, ones that people often ask about. So I'm going to start with you, McGregor, because you're a former prosecutor yourself and U.S. attorney, and I want to ask you, everybody always wonders, so why have the death penalty? You know, is there some sort of deterrent effect? Can you address that for us? I mean, as a former prosecutor, why is the death penalty important to guys like you?
There are a multitude of reasons. Number one, there are those, as I said earlier, these cases truly are the worst of the worst. And you have the right of society to protect itself from the worst of the worst. And what people tend to forget is, even if in a life without the possibility of parole sentence, someone still has to deal with these people. And there have been documented cases where those on death row are still calling the shots. One of the persons most recently executed here in the state of California was in prison for murder and then arranged the killing of key witnesses in his own case. And that's what got him the death penalty. So it doesn't end when they're convicted and sentenced to the life without the possibility of parole. In addition, these cases, as I said earlier, are so egregious and so outrageous in their facts. You know, multiple kidnappings and sexual assaults of women, multiple police officers killed. These truly are the worst of the worst offenders in our state, and juries and subsequently judges have found that this was the appropriate sentence to hand down to this particular defendant.
Okay. Real quickly, and we can't get into this too much detail, but is there a deterrent effect in your view or not of this?
There are many people who will argue that there isn't. I have seen published opinions that there is.
Okay.
And there are statistical analyses which show that in those states that have the death penalty in a prescribed set of time, and then there actually is an execution, you will see a downtick in the murder rate.
Yeah, we're going to get to that timely. That's another big issue. But Natasha, real quick, very quickly on this notion of deterrence. For the
More than 100 law enforcement professionals support Prop 34 and urge you to vote yes, because they know the best way to deter murder is to catch killers. The shocking truth is that 46% of murders go unsolved in California every single year. Killers literally walk free on our streets while we waste hundreds of millions of dollars on a death penalty system that is broken beyond repair. That's why Prop 34 directs money to local law enforcement specifically so we can catch more killers and keep those people behind bars. That's what we need to do to actually reduce murder in California.
And now let me take it from there to this notion of timeliness, which McGregor brought up, because this really seems to be the rub or the nub of the question when it comes down to cost savings or not. You know, in other words, and you mentioned, McGregor, well, if it was done in a timely way, you know, then the states see that. Is the problem really the way our death penalty system is carried out, not the death penalty itself? Do you know what I mean by that? In other words, the people stay on death row for decades sometimes without being executed, and people say that's why it costs so much, the death penalty, and that's why we don't see perhaps the deterrent effect that McGregor's talking about. So why don't you start with that, and we'll give him a shot as well.
The problem is that California's death penalty is broken beyond repair. In the last 34 years of having the death penalty, only 13 executions have been carried out. Over 900 people have been sentenced to death in that time. The average time people spend on death row is 25 years, and most of them die of natural causes, just like people sentenced to life without parole. But the difference is that for those 25 or 30 years, they get special housing in private cells on death row that costs much more. They get special privileges, and they get lawyers for life, lawyers who take care of them, who send them TVs, who send them packages on Christmas. The system is broken beyond repair, and we have an alternative in life without parole that will end the waste.
Okay, let's get to that, because is that not, in many people's view, the real problem? Is that the death penalty is not carried out, and in the court system, whatever, drags out the penalty. It's not the death penalty itself, but it's the process. Is that your view or not?
Well, it's ironic to me that those who have created the delay and created the cost now say we should get rid of the death penalty because of the delay and the cost. California's system, as it is executed and carried out by the courts, what I will call the death penalty industrial complex, in which you have lots of high-priced lawyers doing pro bono cases on these matters, in conjunction with a liberal ownership of the public safety committees in the legislature, have combined to create this dysfunction. Many times bills have been introduced in the state legislature to revise the law around the death penalty, to provide more funding for the state public defender so we can get lawyers appointed sooner and get the whole process going. But those bills go to the public safety committees in the legislature to die. In addition, we have a core group of judges on the Ninth Circuit who will vote to reverse every death penalty case that comes before them, regardless of the merits. I mean, Reinhardt has said as much as that. So it's that unholy alliance of those three organizations which has created this problem, and now they want to end the death penalty because they've created the problem.
Okay.
So, but I would say that the reality is that this problem can be fixed. And it very well may be that once this proposition is defeated in November, we come back in 2 years with another proposition that will put before the people the measures that can revise this process so it can work, can be effective, and can be put forward in California.
Natasha, one of the provisions here in Prop 34 is it's retroactive, so that it would apply to people who are already on death row, correct, and switch them from a death penalty sentence, right, to life without the possibility of parole, correct?
That's correct.
Now, I just want you to address that, because in many people's view, it's like, well, wait a minute now. You know, these families, whoever they were, the victims, they already got a death sentence. The prosecutors got it. Now you're changing the sentence. Somehow, I think in many people's minds, that's seen as unfair. I want you to have a chance to address that.
More than 400 murder victim family members have endorsed Proposition 34 and urge you to vote yes, because they have seen firsthand that California's death penalty is broken beyond repair, and that it is a cruel and hollow promise to victims' family members. These are people like Rose, a woman who was brutally raped by a serial killer. She is one of 2 women who survived this assault. And she testified 3 times to make sure he would be sentenced to death when she was just a young woman. That was 28 years ago. And in those 28 years, he's gotten special privileges in a special cell, and he's never had to work a day in his life. People like Rose support Prop 34 because they want to end the special privileges for death row inmates and put them to work like everyone else. They're already serving what amounts to life without parole. Let's stop the waste.
McGregor, I want you to address this retroactive component, because this is something that I think a lot of people are going to be looking at in 34, and right or wrongly saying this is either fair or unfair, that it applies to people who received the death penalty in the last number of decades.
That's exactly right. You are exactly right. The 725 men on death row right now will be commuted off of death row into what will be presumably a life without the possibility of parole sentence. Here's the problem. Today, the death penalty. Tomorrow, life without the possibility of parole. I can assure you that the proponents of Prop 34 will come after life without the possibility of parole next. And then they'll attempt to eliminate that. And if they're successful in that, people who are on death row today will be eligible for parole. This is real, and this could happen. This is not speculative, because I have no doubt in my mind that life without the possibility of parole is the next target should this group succeed in knocking out the death penalty in California.
That's just not true.
And I did want to comment on the work component. I think it's
good, because I was going to get to that next. I want you both to have a chance to talk about this notion, because the third component, I'm trying to cover all the components real quickly, and we've got to wrap up fairly shortly, but this notion that anyone found guilty of murder would be required to work in prison with some of their wages given to fund victims and their families. So real quick for you, McGregor, and then you, Natasha, on that one.
You know, it's unfortunate for the proponents of this that the work requirement has been the law in California for several decades. This is nothing new. It's existing law, and all they're doing is restating it. The requirement that part of the wages be paid into the Victim Restitution Fund has been on the books since 1982. This is nothing different.
And people are doing that now.
It's a way to package it up and make it look more attractive.
People are doing that now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Natasha, the work requirement.
I have to address this lie that we are going after life without parole next. That is just absolutely a lie. I personally believe that life without possibility of parole is an appropriate sentence in California. By voting yes on this initiative, voters ensure that the legislature cannot change life without possibility of parole, and many of the law enforcement and victims' family members working hard on this initiative believe that life without parole is an appropriate sentence. And so I just have to stand up for all of us and say that is absolutely not true.
Okay, real quick, about 15 seconds on the work requirement.
Less than 1% of people on death row work. Right now, they sit in their cells watching TV and talking to their lawyers, and they get to go to yard every single day. This initiative actually puts those people to work so they can actually pay into the Victims' Compensation Fund. That will be the first time people on death row are ever required to work.
Okay, but right now, are people with life without the possibility of parole required to work?
They
yes
are.
Or no?
They are, and that's why we have to replace the death penalty with life without parole to get these people off of their special privileges and their special cells in death row and put them to work.
Or alternatively, somehow require the guys on death row to do the same.
Because they're on death row, they have all these special privileges and cells, and being on death row means we can't make them work.
Right. And McGregor said that could be changed, but currently, as you state, that's not the case.
It's been the same for 34 years.
Okay.
If you want to make them work, vote yes on 34 and change their sentences to life without parole, send them to the general prison population, and put them to work.
Okay. McGregor, real quick on that.
You can't force someone to work. So to think that magically, if we take them off a death row and put them in an LWOP status, they're going to start working every day is ludicrous. The point is, this has been put in the proposition by the proponents to make it look more attractive. A voter in the booth say, "Oh, we're going to put them to work." Well, the reality is that's been the law since the 40s. It's no change. And the only way we are going to change it is if, as I said, we come back and only by a vote of the people put through a series of progressive steps to improve the death penalty process in this state. In reality, is this going to happen under any circumstances? Because the legislature kills any effort to improve the death penalty, and that's the reality in which we're living here in California.
Okay. Finally, very quickly, the last major component, this earmark of $100 million in grants to be paid for by projected savings, apparently, from the proposal going to law enforcement agencies. Natasha, real quick on that.
That's right. The official analysis of Prop 34 says it will save $130 million each year. The initiative sets aside a small amount of money, $10 million the first year and $30 million the next year, that will go to local law enforcement specifically to address the fact that 46% of murders and 56% of rapes are not solved in California every year.
Okay. McGregor, on that one?
The reality is it doesn't necessarily go to local law enforcement. The money goes to the state attorney general for her to decide what to do with it. That's where the money goes. Number two, the legislative analyst, when we met with him, we stressed the point that the long-term effect of this proposition is to greatly increase the costs of the state because of housing and medical care. And he doesn't care. He's only looking at the first year. That's all he cares about. He told us that flat out. So if we look at the long term, the costs of ending the death penalty in California swamp any level of savings that's going to be created. And this concept of a savings that's going to be given to the Attorney General to do something with is a farce.
Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this real quick. You got an opportunity. Got an opportunity here to make your best points. Last 30 seconds for each of you. Why, Natasha, yes on 34?
By voting yes on 34, California voters ensure that we will never execute an innocent person in California. It is tough justice. It puts convicted killers in prison until they die with no hope of ever getting out, and it makes them work and pay restitution into the Victims' Compensation Fund. Prop 34 will save hundreds of millions of dollars each year. Prop 34 will save hundreds of millions of dollars. The official analysis says $130 million each year, and it directs funds to law enforcement to solve rapes and murders.
All right, McGregor, 30 seconds. Why no on 34?
Because if a no vote on 34 ensures that 725 of the absolute worst of the worst killers in California remain on death row and will be executed in a timely legal fashion. Number two, it ensures that the additional costs that the state will incur through ending the death penalty will not become a reality. Number three, it ensures that crime victims and the surviving family members will have justice. They will see it done. And those are really the core issues. The voters of this state overwhelmingly have supported the death penalty for decades. It is the law. It can be carried out. It can be fixed. And the bottom line is, let's mend it, not end it.
All right, we do have to end it right there, but certainly a passionate discussion. You folks did a great job trying to lay out both sides of this argument for Californians. This has never been something that's been easy for Californians, certainly not this time around as well. So we want to thank Natasha Minsker, from the campaign manager for Safe California, and McGregor Scott, chair of Californians for Justice and Public Safety, for being with us today. We appreciate that a lot. And remember, friends, this is an opportunity you have to make your voice known on a very important issue to many in our state. So take an opportunity to register to vote, and on November 6th, make your voice heard. And remember, at citizenvoice.org, we're here to help.